hope everyone is doing okay tonight. It's 9:19. It's going to be a late night of videos because I got started late today. But nevertheless, let's hop across the pond. There are big events right now that are taking place within the UK, and there are events that we should be paying attention to because they are going to be absolutely massive and in the news in the coming months, particularly in February and March, when there's certain time limits that the UK needs to meet, one of which is what is it going to do when it leaves the European Union? Is it going to exit out in this kind of Mad Max Brexit where they crash out of the European Union without a deal? At this point, we don't know. Currently, there is no deal on the table. And ultimately, they're still in the negotiation phase and they're supposed to leave in like March. So this is coming down to the wire. To be fair, I personally think the Prime Minister ran down the clock, that she wanted to have it her deal and no deal, but Parliament started to take more control over the process when it seems like she was trying to force down their throats a deal that was massively unpopular. As you remember, she spent 2 years negotiating a deal. And in negotiating that deal was supposed to come up to a vote last month, but because she understood and knew fully that that deal was going to be voted down and that she was probably going to lose her head, meaning just politically, as it was voted down in historic margins, she pushed it to January to try to beg some people to get on her team and get on her side and to make this work and to get concessions from the European Union and all that good stuff. Come January, those concessions were not forthwith. And she had to stand there and take a pummeling in regards to the vote that I think was like by over 200 votes against the government in a historic agreement. Meaning the withdrawal agreement was a big deal. This was supposed to set the framework for how Britain was supposed to exit the European Union. And her party, the Labour Party, they may not agree on much, but they fully agreed that they disliked that deal. Particularly the Brexiteers who had an issue with the Irish backstop. They voted it down. So now the Prime Minister, being compelled, like a vampire being compelled by Parliament, was supposed to come back and give them a plan B. Plan A failed. What do you got else in the bag? What's next? What's the other arrow in that quiver? Now, Theresa May comes back with plan B that was effectively plan A. Now, you would expect that this would get voted down magnificently, seeing as the other one was voted down magnificently. But the Prime Minister did something today that was fascinating, unexpected, and I strongly suspect will amount to squat, will amount to nothing. But you never know. Things sometimes are unexpected. And I say today, but I mean, today my time, yesterday the other time. The Prime Minister today, as her withdrawal bill, Plan B, was put up for votes, you would expect this to lose, but not so much, because she put in a twist. The Prime Minister capitulated to Brexiteers and what Brexiteers wanted, meaning get rid of that backstop. We don't want to be trapped into anything for any length of time where we can't individually discharge ourselves as a nation. They're not wrong. Think about it for the moment. The United States enters into a deal, but the United States, for whatever reason, is stuck legally in that deal where it can't extricate itself without the consent of some other nation. You can imagine for a proud nation that used to be masters of the universe, that this would be somewhat of an indignity. You know, we have to beg you to let us out of this deal. This was a no-go. Regardless of whether it was, you know, the backstop wasn't supposed to be something that hit or not, it was kind of irrelevant. Just by almost a philosophical thing that a country is supposed to be able to have a certain degree of self-determination, that this was a foul. But that may be a foul, but it doesn't solve the other issue. So the other issue, and is somewhat of a logic issue, if the UK is pulling out of the European Union, and if right now there's border there, but it's somewhat porous, it's not something that people are actively checking, there's no military at the border, there's no checkpoints and that stuff. If Ireland, of the Republic of Ireland, is going to remain in the European Union, then there are going to be certain regulatory guidelines that the Republic of Ireland is going to be following, just like the rest of the European Union. And if the UK doesn't have to follow those guidelines, and if products are going to move between point A and point B, in what way are you going to ensure that the products that are moving from point A to point B meet your regulatory guidelines? How are you going to do it without a checkpoint? Now, you can imagine this became somewhat of a sticking point and somewhat of an extreme problem here. The most simple solution would be to give the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, just allow those two to merge back together. This is a no-go, because if Theresa May even breathes this, if she thinks it's in her sleep, she would use the support of the DUP, and the DUP is what is propping up Theresa May's government. That's a lot of backstory, but the backstory is necessary for somebody to come into the video like, what the hell is he talking about? And don't follow British politics. So, today, the vote comes up. Theresa May, you would think is going to get voted down since this Plan B is essentially Plan A, but there is a U-turn. Theresa May changes and does something different. Now, in this, she comes back and supports the Brady Amendment. Now, the Brady Amendment, for all intents and purposes, says go back to the European Union and renegotiate this backstop. Get rid of this backstop. Take a look at this video. This video is amazing, and it runs into a few problems, like right off the bat, that you don't even have to think that far into it. That if you couldn't get rid of the backstop, you know, if you can't discharge the backstop in the entire time in your negotiations, especially when it became a sticking point over the last few months, how can you get rid of it now? Theresa May believes, though, that being voted down in such magnificent numbers and the support of Parliament for the Brady Amendment, that it would give her a certain degree of credibility, of resolute Britain is in regards to not having this particular item, and that this would give her the political clout to go and renegotiate this. You guys have gotten delusional. You guys have gotten completely and utterly delusional. But that is what is being sought out. So let's take a look at her making this point.
It's now clear that there is a route that can secure a substantial and sustainable majority in this House for leaving the EU with a deal. We will now take this mandate forward and seek to obtain legally binding changes to withdrawal agreement that deal with concerns on the backstop, while guaranteeing no return to a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And my colleagues and I will talk to the EU about how we address the House's views. Simply opposing no deal is not enough to stop it. The government will now redouble its efforts to get a deal that this House can support. In light of the defeat of the Right Honourable Member, the Leader of the Opposition's amendment, I again invite him to take up my offer of the meeting to see if we can find a way forward. Mr. Speaker, if this House can come together, we can deliver the decision the British people took in June 2016, restore faith in our democracy, and get on with building a country that works for everyone. And as Prime Minister, I will work with members across the House to do just that.
The Prime Minister essentially made a U-turn. Now, the U-turn that the Prime Minister made was try to avoid or to get rid of the Irish backstop. Now, this will bring on some of the Brexiteers that had concerns for a very simple reason. You know, it's ultimately Britain doesn't necessarily want to be subordinate to somebody else's laws where it can't discharge itself from. If you're a sovereign nation, are you really a sovereign nation if you're in some kind of agreement that you can't extricate yourself out of? Again, are you sovereign or not? So this was somewhat of an issue. This was a big deal. By the same token, you're stuck with a problem. If you're leaving the European Union, great for you. That means you're taking back control of your, regulations and all this other stuff. But Ireland is not. But you're still part of a United Kingdom. If items are crossing your borders, how do you ensure that there's regulatory alignment? The European Union has certain rules that it has to abide by, or member states has to abide by. Since London, or since the UK is no longer part of that, or I should say Britain is no longer part of that, Britain doesn't have to abide by those. So if things are crossing between those 2 points, there needs to be a border between to make sure that the items that are crossing into the European Union meet regulatory standards. Problem. The Belfast Agreement, or the Good Friday Agreement, prevents a hard border there. So you have a situation that demands a hard border, but you have regulation and obligations of the country self-contracts that prevents and avoids a hard border. Can't have it both ways. You have to meld the circle. the backstop, and the point of the backstop was to say, if we can't come to a resolution for this, then this is what we would do while we work on the resolution. Brexiteers looked at this and said, we will be stuck in the European Union forever under this, and we won't have the capacity to unilaterally, if we wanted to, extricate ourselves from this agreement. So the agreement was dead on arrival between the DUP and Brexiteers, not to mention elements of labor. And just to make sure you heard what took place in the standpoint of Theresa May. So Theresa May did a U-turn. Theresa May essentially, her bill passed, Plan B passed, but Plan B passed with one modification that is significant, that she go back to the European Union to renegotiate the deal. Theresa May's statement is awesome and is a massive, massive understatement. So, right here, in a remarkable U-turn, let's take a look at it. In a remarkable U-turn, May on Tuesday publicly submitted to the demands of the conservative arch Brexiteers that the deal's controversial backstop was unacceptable. The backstop is an insurance policy. I read that part. On Tuesday, the House of Commons voted to send May back to Brussels to a new deal without that backstop. May welcomed the vote as a clear mandate. I love that. Mandate. I love that word. It is now clear that there is a route that can secure a substantial and sustainable majority in this House for leaving the EU with a deal. Fair enough. What that means is, look, we now have a way through. Beforehand, there was no clear path in order to get a deal from the standpoint of the European Union because everybody was against Theresa May's deal. Let's keep going. The vote was decisive, and I listened, May said on Tuesday. Today we need to send an emphatic message about what we want to do. She urged MPs to vote to rule out the backstop, which will send the UK into the customs union with the EU until a new trade deal is signed, to be replaced with an alternate arrangement to avoid a hard border in Ireland. This will give May the mandate I need to negotiate in Brussels a significant and legally binding change to the withdrawal agreement, she said. She says that such a change would not be easy, and there was a limited appetite on part of the European Union, but she believed that she could secure it. There was a limited appetite. Look, limited appetite is a uniquely British way of saying it. And that is very politically nice, you know. But let's be very clear. Limited appetite means no appetite at all. That is a magnificent understatement in regards to trying to describe what is a dead end. For the last several months, you've tried to renegotiate that backstop. You've gone nowhere. And the European Union, as May was giving this speech and as she was standing to give this speech, the European Union put a dagger in her and said, this is not open to negotiations. We are not making any changes to this document. We're sorry. So, in fact, right here, let's take a look at some of the brutality that took place. No renegotiation, says the European Union, after MPs backed to replace the backstop. Theresa May immediately hit a brick wall in Brussels after being backed by MPs to reopen the withdrawal agreement as Donald Tusk, with the backing of Emmanuel Macron, said that the EU would not renegotiate. Within minutes of the Commons backing the Prime Minister's plan to replace the Irish backstop, a spokesman for the European Council's president insisted that Tusk would not permit any changes to the deal already agreed upon by Downing Street. Tusk, the EU's most senior official, instead urged the Prime Minister to explain her next steps, claiming that the agreement negotiated over the last 20 months remains the best and only way to ensure the orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union. The spokesman added that the backstop is part of the withdrawal agreement, and the withdrawal agreement is not open for renegotiation. Charles Grant, a long-term Brussels hand who heads the Center for European Reform, has a sobering message for Brexiteers tonight. He warns that the European Union will indeed refuse to reopen talks on the backstop and highlights the gulf between what is on offer in Brussels and the kind of concessions the Brexiteers now think they can win. He's saying they're delusional, that this vote here to open up negotiations when it was already clear that the negotiations could not be reopened is delusional. Your mandate is for Britain, not for the other 27 member states. That's their point. Yeah, I'm going to end this here. This one has gone long and massively messed up, and I may actually redo this video. But that's what's essentially going on in the UK. this is putting Britain in a standoff with the European Union. Now, if you remember, the last country that said it had a mandate and ended up in a standoff with the European Union was Greece. They ended up with a standoff in a different way. I mean, granted, their mandate was on whether or not they were going to accept the bailouts. And when they said no, in this kind of great show of democratic process, and in a referendum, I think over 60% agreed that no, we don't necessarily want to take the bailouts that are being handed to us, since they're not going to help us get out of the situation to which we are in. Well, the very next day, if I'm not mistaken, in the next few days, Brussels shut down their banks. Now, after their banks were shut down, the government capitulated. The government didn't just capitulate; it started to enact the austerity policies themselves. Meaning, this, supposedly radical left-wing government starts to enact policies, handed down policies from the European Union. So, or you could say from the banks in this case. But Britain is in a different situation, and Britain has somewhat of a different caliber in regards to, I'm going to say, how they see themselves and in relation to the European Union. Not to mention, it was a different situation in respect to certain power dynamics, particularly in regards to finance. But we'll see how long this lasts. I am extremely skeptical that these guys are going to reopen the negotiation. And what I did hear from Juncker was something about a customs union, is what Jeremy Corbyn was pushing forth, the customs union. But if they're going to be in a customs union, they're not going to be able to do trade deals, which it's like, why did you leave in the first place? So I'm not going to keep this one. I'm going to, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. And you can always support the PayPal or Patreon. If you enjoy the content, please hit like. Also, make sure you subscribe and the notification button is hit. I heard a lot of people saying they're not getting notifications. And if you enjoy the content, you find yourself coming back here often, please consider supporting through PayPal. Even $1 helps. Thanks all. Or Patreon. Either one. Thanks all.